Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome to my session today on unschooling and brain development learning stages. I am so happy that you're here and that we can share this morning together. I hope your weather's great. I just have been loving this conference, and I want to send a big thank you to Jerry and Peter and all those tireless volunteers. And I haven't seen their matching outfits today, but they looked pretty cool yesterday, and it's so much work, and I'm so happy that they put this together. So thank you, Jerry and Peter and volunteers. So my name is Judy Arnall, and I'm a certified family life educator. I'm a certified child development specialist, and the information I'm presenting today is mostly from two sources: The Growing Brain from 0 to 3 in the US, and The Brain Story, which is an organization from the Palix Foundation that has compiled the research of 49 neuroscientists from across the world and getting out what brains do, what are healthy brains, how they develop, and any issues with brains. And they put that in a nice package that's so easily digestible by the public. I am also an author, a best-selling author actually. I've written 4 books on non-punitive parenting. And I have 5 children that I gave up all punishments by the time the oldest one was 8. So that means I've raised 5 teenagers without confiscating their devices or taking a door off their room. So I am a firm believer in treating children with respect and working problems out as we would with adults. So my books have Discipline Without Distress is all about tools for handling daily things without punishment, and Parenting with Patience is handling the stress and the anger that is normal in family relationships and helping our children handle stress and anger. The Attachment Parenting Tips is the latest one. That's just on tips, no theory. And Plugged In Parenting is a DVD, which is kind of outdated now. So some of those books have been published in other countries, in Spain, in Chinese, in Greece, and in South Korean. So my latest book is Unschooling to University, obviously, you've seen that. Today I'm going to talk about part 4, so child development stages. So the bottom part right down here, we're going to go through that in depth. I also started an organization in Canada about a few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, called unschoolingcanada.ca. We have a lot of resources on our website, and we welcome people from all over the world. So also a Facebook group called Unschooling STEM. So when you hear about unschooling, you don't hear a whole lot about STEM: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And that has been my fascination, because a greater proportion of my children have actually been interested in STEM careers and pathways. So that has been an interest of mine, because you always get the question, what about math? So I also have a blog called unschoolingtouniversity.com. Come visit me there. And I like to list things, talk about things that are not in the book, but related. So welcome. I just want to put it out there. We love teachers. Teachers are doing an amazing job with what they have to work with, and we love learning. Absolutely. Every teacher should have a tip jar on their desk. So I thought today what I do is present for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then I will open it up to Q&A. So if you could just hold off your questions until then. I'm not monitoring the chat box but I will later. I will look at your questions out. Okay, so let's start. What is the problem? One thing I'm going to do is this presentation is geared to a lot of people who are new to self-directed education. So I have a few slides in here about what it's about. So the problem is, what do children bring to school and when do they lose it? And you look at kids on their first day of kindergarten and they're so excited. They just can't wait to go and try this new experience. And somewhere between ages 5 and 18, they lose it. What happens to that awesome curiosity and engagement that they started school with and they didn't follow up with? The worldwide high school dropout rate is 20 to 80%. Now, in Canada, it's about 20%. That's 1 in 5 brains we lose that are not finishing high school. And I don't think anybody absolutely has to finish high school. But what that tells me is that our education system knows that. That is a figure that's out there. And yet we still cling to the same model of education, where we open up those little brains, pour in all the information, zip it up, keep them going along the conveyor belt. And if we have a 20% dropout rate, that would tell me something is wrong with the system as it is right now. So what's the solution? One of those solutions is self-directed education. And that doesn't always mean self-taught. It means that the learner takes control and owns their education. And if you look at it, babies born own their education right from birth. A toddler can solve their own problems through their play. And we just have to, as Pat Ferenga says, get out of their way and let them continue to solve those problems. Content is at our fingertips, but we need alternative methodologies of delivery. So a big question the education world asks is, what are ways you learn what you know today? And if you look at this list, school is one part of everywhere we learn, children and adults. So what is unschooling? Unschooling is children own their education, they own their learning, and they will learn whenever they need to. And what happens is when children are born, we let them own their learning up until about age 5. And once they have 5 candles on their birthday cake, we say to them, you've had all these years of fun and play, and guess what? Today, you can't play anymore. You're going to go to this place called school. And instead of learning what you want to learn, you're going to learn what the government thinks you want to learn or needs you to learn. So unschoolers just keep on playing all the way to wherever they want to go. Some of them at about age 17 decide, want a more formal experience, maybe want to get some credentials or qualifications. So I'm going to study that. And they may align up with the school requirements or the government requirements. But both children learn. And I'd like to show this pathway to parents in that children all learn the same thing, whether they do through school or through play. And I've noticed that with my own eyes. Students are borderless. We can learn from any course or resources anywhere in the world. And I started unschooling my children before the internet. So and it's amazing with the internet now. Holy, we have all these opportunities opened up. And I think the future in education is, doesn't matter where you learn, maybe you have to prove your qualifications. Boundaries and regulation are going to be less important. So unschooling is freedom to learn. It's defined as a philosophy and lifestyle of educational freedom in which a child's natural curiosity and motivation, nurtured in a stimulating environment, will lead the child to learn what he or she needs to know in the time frame he or she needs it. So it's like a buffet, and the child is standing there with an empty plate and decides, do I want more broccoli, which could be the math, or do I want more brownies, which is the video games? And instead of the parent deciding what goes on the child's plate or the government deciding what goes on the child plate. The child decides how much, if, how long, how deep, and if they want to eat. So in self-directed education, there's 3 components. Children usually need a facilitator to help them get what they need. They need resources and they need abundant, free, unstructured time. And that's at a premium these days. So this is what you do. This is how you unschool. You provide lots of time and you all house, believe me. What do kids do all day? They do all these things. They read, they play, they game, they chores, do field trips, cook, crafts, projects, volunteering, and run a business. Now, there are many benefits to unschooling. I'm not going to list them all here. There's 61 and they're in my book, but that's not the scope of today's. I just want to name 3 of the biggest advantages, and that is that motivation is never a problem. The child is always developmentally ready, and because of that, the absorption of material is very, very high. So no motivation problems. That's super easy. Our story. So I had 5 kids and their learning needs were not met for various reasons. And I pulled them out of school. My 2 oldest ones went to school till about grade 2. And I brought them home, and like many parents, it's a continuum. You don't trust yourself because 150 years of media and society have told you you're not fit to teach your own children. So I brought them home to homeschooling, and we followed the school curriculum as much as possible. And what happened was my kids stopped listening to me after about 3 months because I'm mom, I'm safe. Not that teachers are not safe, but they can howl and tantrum and not do their work because I'm mom. And I had babies and toddlers underfoot, and I just thought, okay, this is not working. And more, we let go of the curriculum and we slid into unschooling. And I like to say we were homeschoolers that never got around to homeschooling. We were out in the community, we traveled, we went on field trips, and more, my role became facilitator from teacher. And that was a much more fun role because I could learn along with the kids. It got so bad that one of my kids wrote on his math book, "I hate mathematics." This is grade 2. Thank goodness today he's an engineer, so he must have found that love somewhere along the way. So in my work in teaching parents about child development and family communication, I came across the original self-directed gurus in the 70s, but only for teaching adults. James Draper and Malcolm Knowles put out a lot of books on the difference between pedagogy and andragogy. And quite frankly, the only difference is that children may not know what they don't know yet. But even with the internet, we know that's not true. They do eventually learn things that they stumble upon. So my children did a self-directed high school. In our province, you have to meet outcomes, but it doesn't matter how you meet those outcomes or how you get there. So they wrote the grade 12 exams, and they got an average of 78%, where our provincial average is 65%. They got scholarships, and they went on to universities. So my 4 kids were accepted to universities. 3 graduated in STEM programs, 1 in humanities, and so far we have one master's student. So they applied to 10 Canadian universities, and they were all in the Maclean School rankings. So in Canada, Maclean's is our equivalent to Time, to Europe's The Economist. So they do that. So at the same time, a lot of our unschooled friends, kids, and my friends as friends, my kids as friends, also went off to post-secondary. And in my circle, I could count 30 kids I knew that unschooled and went on to post-secondary. Now, I'm not saying post-secondary is for everyone, nor is it a signal of success. But I speak to the naysayers, not the converted. So I need evidence that this works. And for many people, admittance to post-secondary is a sign of it works. So just putting that out there. So there were 30 unschoolers, which I profiled in my book, and they all went to universities, colleges, and tech schools. They unschooled from 3 to 12 years. 22 have already graduated, and 2 have got on to masters. And of those 30, we had 10 that went into STEM careers. We had 4 engineers in the group, 10 into humanities, and 10 into arts. So unschooling does work. We just need more evidence. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about brain development. As Dr. Armstrong says, human development research should inform educational practice, because really, when it boils down to it, it's all about the brain. So babies are born with 100 billion brain cells. And for the most part, most of the brain cells are not connected, where the brain cells send neurotransmitters across that gap to form pathways. Let's see if my video works now. Okay, let's try this. Yay! And this is what happens. So the axons reach out to the dendrites and send a neurotransmitter across that gap to form pathways. And that's what happens to 100 billion brain cells. Oops, okay. Okay, this is the first time a video actually worked in my PowerPoint, yes. Okay, so for the most part, as you can see, the brain cells are not connected. And then by age 7, there's a whole lot of connections because the brain is very active during those early years. But if those connections are not being used, by age 15, the brain has pruned the unused ones and strengthened the ones that are used all the time. So these brain cells at birth mostly keep the heart and lungs going, the body functions going, but they grow after birth through experiential learning, okay? So for example, if a child starts learning a different language, say French at age 2, and they decide to drop it by age 6, the brain will prune those pathways. And by age 15, that child will probably not remember any French. So my experience has been, my children didn't remember a whole lot of their early homeschooling years until puberty. We took them to homeschooling centers, we did lessons, we did experiments, we did field trips. And when I asked them in the teen years, what do you remember? They remember the vending machine that gave them Pokemon toys when we went to the homeschooling center. That's it. Nothing else was there. But the good part is the experiences they had there strengthened those brain cells and stimulated neurons. So play can grow brain connections just as much as workbooks can, and all children need more play. So let's look at development within the context of physical, cognitive, social, and emotional growth. So this is an elementary part of the brain. This is the cerebral cortex, and it's pretty well divided into 4 parts, which we call the top brain, And then there's the bottom brain functions, the cerebellum and the brainstem are bottom or hind brain. And did I say it develops from the bottom to the top and from the back to the front? That's how brains develop. So how do you remember this? So babies pretty well are born with bottom brain functions that are pretty well developed. The brainstem, the cerebellum, those are what we call the hindbrain. It keeps them breathing, the heart rate going, blood sugar, motor control, and their coordination. The occipital lobe also governs seeing, sight, and that is most sensitive in babies too. In fact, by the age of 3 months, babies can see everything in the room that adults can see. So those are what are highly sensitive and developed. Next is the temporal lobe. That is very sensitive during the toddler age. Think toddler, temporal, and that is where auditory comes through, language recognition, visual memory, and the emotional response. The parietal lobe is where it's extra sensitive through the preschool years. So think parietal, preschool. Someone has their mic on. If someone could take their mic off, that would be super awesome. And that is where sensory processing, attention, language, and perception begins in that area. The frontal lobe I think of as frontal first grade. So school age is where higher order cognitive thinking skills happen. Planning, problem solving, personality, those kinds of things really come out in that school age year. And then the prefrontal lobe, think puberty, prefrontal, puberty. That is where those executive function skills really come alive. This is kind of my, my hand-drawn part of the brain. It's interesting to know that this temporal region is very heightened during the toddler years and also again during the teen years. But by the teen years, they have the words when they're going through emotional states. So that's interesting. So let's go through the different stages and see what happens in terms of learning for those stages. So babies, again, the bottom brain is where those brain functions happen. So babies, they don't really think. They feel sensory input and they give sensory output, which is called crying. Input, output. They're hungry, they cry. They're cold, they cry. So their whole job that 6 months is to build attachment and trust. Young toddlers, now, usually they're up and walking and they're exploring, or at least they're crawling, they're exploring. And their job is to build security and explore within safety, a safe environment. And during that first year, all children learn to walk. And there's such a range of development, anywhere from 8 months to 18 months is normal. And we don't teach children to walk. We thought we did. Back in the 50s, we bought children walkers because we thought this will get them walking faster. And evidence tells us, no, doesn't work. They walk when they're developmentally ready to walk. Older toddlers, now again, the midbrain, the temporal region is very heightened, and they're working on building security and confidence. What do they do at this stage? They learn to talk. Again, we don't teach how to talk. We talk to them. They observe, they're processing language, they're hearing vocabulary, they're hearing tone, pitch, they're hearing facial contact, eye contact, expressions. That's how children learn language. And every child is wired to learn any language on earth. So a child that has a mother who speaks Chinese, A father who speaks Spanish and goes to an English school will, yes, they'll get things mixed up and use wrong words at some time, but they're on their way to learning any language proficiently. All three of those languages they'll learn as they grow. So there's no stopping them. Preschoolers is age 3 to 5 years. And again, that's the back brain, the more parietal lobe. And it builds self-regulation, beginning executive function skills of self-control and focus. So I love this slide. It kind of shows you the development of executive function. There's 4 components: working memory, focus, self-control, and planning. And I often ask people, can a 3-year-old play chess? Because the game of chess incorporates all those. Working memory is remembering what moves you're going to do. Focus is just focusing on the game and not looking at your brother who's eating a cookie. Self-control is the ability to take turns and not throw the game board across the room when you lose. And planning is planning, what do you do when your opponent takes your queen? So all of those skills are executive function. 3-year-old doesn't have it, right? But by age 7, yes, they do. They can play chess. So look at this big leap from 3 to age 6 in executive function and self-control. And that's why children don't start mandatory school until age 6 or even 7. 4 in European countries is still quite early. You can see that they have about half the skills they should have when they start at age 6 or 7. And then there's another big leap from 13 to 25. And after 25, I'm sorry, it goes downhill. But from 13, and here is a sweet spot for unschoolers. From 17 on up, that self-control kicks in. So when a 17-year-old's friends start planning their future, their work, their entrepreneurship, that's when children think, what am I going to do for work? What am I going to do for my life? And they start becoming a lot more controlled, a lot more focused, a lot more planning on what they need to do to get to where they're going. And it kicks in. Even if it doesn't kick in around age 17, it will kick in at some point in time. So for babies, toddlers, and preschoolers, they learn through their 5 senses: hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, tasting. Everything goes in their mouth. School agers. So now the frontal brain is most sensitive, but they think logically now, they're concrete, and they understand tangible things that are in their world. So if you look at school curriculums, a lot of what they study, like magnets, rock cycle, wetlands, is things that they can understand, they can see, feel, touch, smell, those kinds of things. So the job here of the brain is building skills and relationships. So again, young children from ages 6 to about 13 learn best through their 5 senses. The brain is wired to learn through 3 dimensions, and play and experiential learning is the best ways for those children to learn. Hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, not so much putting things in their mouths, but talking. And during that year, that's when they learn to read. And that's another skill we don't teach. We think we teach it because for the most part, it happens when children are in school. Around ages 5 to about 10 is a normal time to learn to read. And if it happens, we say, oh, it's because we taught phonics or whole language. But it is a developmental skill. Anyone who's had a child and tried to teach them toilet training, again, you can try all you want when that child is 18 months, but if they're not ready, you're not going to have much success. And if you try again when they're 4, you'll do it in a day. So reading is the same way. Children now live in a very literate world. There's language all over. How can they not learn language when they're immersed in it? So, for example, these are the ages my children learn to read. Ages 4, obviously the English major, 5, and the 8, 9, and 10-year-old had our school system worried. They pressured me to put them into remedial classes, to teach phonics, to give them more workbooks, and I said, no, I am not. They didn't want to do it. If they sniffed anything educational, they ran away. So I wasn't going to fight with my kids to do phonics. And you know what? They all learned to read. Absolutely. So the latest one, the 10-year-old who had learned to read at 10, within 1 year was reading books like this. So not many people can tell who's an early reader, who's a late reader, but you can tell who loves books. I did an informal survey on my Facebook group and asked homeschoolers, how many books a year do your children read? And I got answers anywhere from 20 to 50 books a year. In the school curriculum, 1 book is mandated. So if children can write and read and do math, they can do anything and learn anything. Learning to write, that's a biggie. So I never pressured my kids to write. I feel that they need a passion to write about. Again, like math and writing, we teach the tools before they have the problems to solve. So this is an example of, and all my children were online. So they didn't have really good writing skills. So this was a university notes. And at that time, and professors won't allow laptops in the classes due to privacy. So my children had to handwrite exams at university, timed. So then they decided they needed to write. They wanted to learn cursive. So they got a grade 1 cursive book, started practicing. Within 3 months, they went from this to this, which is not bad. When they want to learn something, they will learn it. So teenagers, they are in the stage of the prefrontal brain development. So this is the age they can start handling abstract thinking. And again, that feeling comes back from the temporal region. Teenagers also learn well through 5 senses, as we adults do. If we went to a conference in person, I'd be getting you up doing stuff right now, just because we don't learn well sitting on our behinds. But this is what we can do. And but teens are at that age where they're ready for more seat work, more paperwork, more online classes. And although they still learn best through hearing, seeing, touching, smelling, talking, and they can also learn theoretical concepts through paper-based. So that's when the curriculum starts giving them more abstract thinking. Now, the big question we get from a lot of people about unschooling is, what about math? Because math is taught linear. Math is about solving everyday problems. And when the situation appears, out comes the tools, right? So this is a cheesecake we got for a birthday party. And I took it out of the box because I only ordered half a cheesecake. And I looked and I thought, that doesn't look like half a cheesecake. There's something wrong. So I called the kids around and I said, do you think that looks like half a cheesecake? And they kind of eyeballed it and thought, no, that doesn't. I said, how are we going to prove this? Because I have to go back to the cheesecake shop and complain. So that was a big lesson on pie. So we used pie to figure out we were missing cake. And that experiment stuck in their brains because it was real world. So what I found raising 3 kids who went into STEM careers is that if your child is very passionate about math, engineering, science, that might be a good time. About age 13 is a good time to sit down and say, do you want to explore this a bit more? Do you want to learn more? And it's a good time that they can make that transition from experiential math to paper math. And experiential math is knowing, kind of figuring out fractions in your head, where paper math is adding fractions on paper. So all my kids who went into STEM kind of started a more formal math program when they wanted it at about grade 8 or grade 9. That's when they started math. So what could they learn through play? All of these they could learn through play. Experiential from ages 0 to 13. And more stuff. All of these things they learn through play, through reading books, through playing video games, through interacting with each other, through living their life. They learned it. People kind of ask, how can they learn 8 grades of math in 1 year? Again, our toilet training example, when the brain is ready, they get it really fast. They can go through it really fast. So then at age 13, they can start learning more abstract concepts. So yes, they can cover 8 grades of math in 1 year and then go on to learn these things if they're heading into a STEM career. But not everybody's heading to a STEM career. So they're definitely more motivated to pursue workbooks at age 13. I try and tell parents, don't do workbooks, textbooks until teen years. Let them enjoy playing, and they will learn reading, writing, basic math through play. And then the last part of the brain, again, the prefrontal cortex, is fine-tunes itself. That's where the nerve cells, the myelin sheath, is thickening, becoming much more stronger, more protective, and better. We often get the question, music lessons. Well, I notice my kids tinkering on instruments at, age 7, 8. So what does a parent do? Signs them up for lessons. Within a year, they didn't practice, they hated it, they didn't want to do it. So I said, okay, that's it, no more. Until you ask me 3 times, I won't sign you up for lessons again. And eventually in the teen years, the late teen years, they found their own lessons. They learned quite a proficient level on violin, guitar, and piano. And the same with language. They didn't learn languages until about university years. So age 20, when they had a need to go to Germany for a work term, for engineering, they decided, I gotta learn German. And yes, it's not as easy to learn as the early years from 0 to 7. Yes, but the brain still learns. And when I say different parts of the brain are sensitive, what I am saying is that the brain is constantly changing, constantly learning, constantly adapting, but some parts are more sensitive during some periods of development. I know you're going to ask me, what if they play video games all day? I am a firm believer in that families choose how they're going to approach video games and screen time. There's a whole continuum of families that set strict limits. There's families that set no limits. I did not set limits. I live in a family of gamers. All 5 of my kids and my husband spend most of their time, free time, video gaming, and they love it. Is it addictive? Not so. Is it compelling? Absolutely. This picture is my kids. I had enough on a Sunday and I said, go outside and play. And it was very quiet. I looked around for them and they're on the back deck playing the Wii through the patio doors. Those Wii remotes work through a ½ an inch of glass. So video games are fine, I think. Research says that your home should still have rich language and conversations so that children learn language. There should be tech-free times for adults and kids too. Everyone should get a certain amount of exercise, and everyone should practice healthy sleep hygiene practices. And are they addictive? Not if your home is free of toxic stress and ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. Yes, they're compelling. My children played way more games than I want to admit. But again, around age 17, that development of executive function, self-control, children know that, yes, they may have to get up at 8 a.m. for a job or for a university class, and they don't need years of practice in order to do that. When they need to do it, they do it. When they need to put aside games for a couple months so they can work on a project, they do it. And they develop that self-control just with brain development. It doesn't need to be punitive parenting practices. And I think video games teach a lot. I have a whole section in my book about the advantages of video and screen time. Teaches cooperation, commitment, teamwork, critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, and innovation. And all those things are what we want to teach in education. Okay, so can play replace school? Absolutely, I think it can. Children will keep on learning and they will keep on flourishing. And I kind of like to end with this poem, Play. It's by Anonymous. I tried to teach my child with words. They often passed him by unheard. I tried to teach my child with books. He only gave me puzzled looks. Despairingly, I turned aside. How can I teach this child? I cried. Into my hand, he placed the key. Come, he said, and play with me. So I would like to answer your questions. Here's how we could keep in touch if you're interested. So I'm gonna just go to the chat box. I'm so happy. If you want to leave now, thank you for coming, and I will go to the chat box. Okay, one question. Is there a way to accelerate the development of executive function? I've read that a child being physically punished will likely delay the development. Oh, that's a great question. Executive function right now is such a huge marketing tool, just as STEM is. I walked through the baby section of our local toy store, and the products marketed to teach your baby STEM skills or executive function skills. You can try and teach things, but they're probably things we have done for centuries. When we ask a child to wait, to take a deep breath and wait your turn, you're teaching them executive function skills. When you teach them the game Simon Says, you're teaching them executive function skills because they're not supposed to do what you've asked them until you said Simon Says, right? That's teaching executive function, but it's embedded in what kids play with anyways. As to the question, a child being physically punished, there's quite a few studies that physical punishment is an adverse childhood experience, although some would disagree with that. What happens is when a child is being punished, their fear kicks in, and then they release adrenaline and cortisol. And what cortisol does is it affects that temporal region, the limbic system, and it delays signals, and that can impair brain development. But physical punishment is classified as only one ACE, one adverse childhood experience, and most of the population have 0 to 1 ACE. So if it's just one ACE, it probably would not impact that child. But if it's occurring along with other ACEs, and a lot of ACEs happen at the same time. It could impact their development. So that's the one-word answer to that. Oh, thank you, Vera. Question. My middle daughter would have been in remedial writing when she was 10, but fortunately was unschooling. At 11, it clicked. She decided to go to school with a friend, and they tested her as a year ahead of her age group. I'm so glad this leap in ability happened before the school fixed it and took credit for her development. She's now a published author with a PhD. Yes, isn't that amazing? And I think that's what we have to trust our judgment as parents. We know our children, we live with them, we know their temperaments, their personalities, their learning styles, their love languages. We know what their likes and interests are. And most parents don't know this because the school systems don't tell you, but you have ultimate say over your child and what's best for them. And there are so many instances in the school system where I said, for example, they wanted to put one of my children in remedial math. And I said, no, I think he can handle normal math. And then he ended up taking STEM math for the program he needed. So we have to go to bat for our kids and advocate for them. And because who else will? Another question, what you're describing is neurotypical children. How about non-neurotypical children, autistic, ADHD? How does unschooling and brain development work together? And I'm going to be honest and say, I don't know that area. I'm sorry. I teach neurotypical child development. So that's been my observations and my background, but it would be interesting to know more research on that. Okay. Question, have you looked at the role of the insula within the lateral sulcus in brain development? No, sorry, I haven't. Another question, a lot of the parents I connect with ask about how they can work and homeschool or unschool. I get that question a lot too. I worked part-time, and then later I worked and wrote books. And actually, in a way, it was a lot better to unschool and work because my personality is I'm a control freak. I am a type A personality. If I had kids that would do workbooks and textbooks and get it all done and packaged away, and I would love that, love that. But that's not how my kids were. So work allowed me to funnel my control freakishness into that. And it kind of helped me stay away from imparting that on my children. So nowadays, like I said, I know in our area, parents can homeschool, but they don't actually have to teach. When they homeschool, they're taking the responsibility for their children's education, and they can outsource it. So they can outsource it to tutors, to other homeschooling parents and co-ops. They can outsource it to their childcare professionals. They can outsource it to a lot of online schools that are not government taught, but are out there on the internet. So if parents can still work full-time, work part-time, and they're the general contractor of their parents' or their children's education, and can pull together pieces to put together an educational program that other people teach, and they just coordinate. Oh, you're welcome. Yes, there's a Facebook group for homeschooling kids on the spectrum. Lots of positive evidence of success in there. Thank you. I think it's unschooling spectrum too.
I don't remember what it's called. I don't think that's it, but there's probably a whole bunch out there. And Facebook groups are an amazing way of gathering that anecdotal evidence.
Great, thank you. Okay, honest question. Why would you end unschooling when it becomes university time? Doesn't this go against the freedom of unschooling? Unschooling to me is the child owns their education and the child makes the decisions. Like back to that buffet, the child standing with a plate. If a child, and we happen to have this happen several times. I've had several kids go back to school and barely lasted anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks. But it was their choice. And that to me is unschooling, is the child decides. The child controls how they're going to learn. And if that means classes, then it's classes. I still consider that unschooling. So when my children are standing before a university with their plates, they decide if they're going to endure the parameters of university. We told them we were perfectly okay with you not going. But they decided that's what they wanted to do. And then they're willing to get up for those 8 a.m. classes. They're willing to do the work, and they're willing to persevere when the going gets tough. If it's their decision, they decide how much they're going to do and if they're going to graduate. So, and they did. They decided to do that. And I really worried because university costs money. And the times I saw them start school and come after 2 weeks and say, I don't like this, I want to come home again, scared me, because you spend all that money, and if they just go for 2 weeks, that's a problem. But and the interesting part is, one of my sons in his engineering class, the last semester he got to do a self-directed project. And at that time, it was really hard to find roommates and rental. He was out of province, so he had to find a place to live. And he did his project on an app that would help students find rental properties, and they could rate each other. So it was like Airbnb, but not quite. It was for the university crowd. And he loved that. And we all wish university was a lot more self-directed and a lot more freedom. It really has some way to go. Any thoughts on parents getting together in co-op groups to unschool together? Oh yes, that is so fantastic. So when our kids were teenagers, libraries are handing out free rooms to people they want to keep funded. So we would book a room every Monday afternoon. The kids would watch a movie, watch a music video, read a book, and talk. And it was great socialization for teenagers. We had one parent as a facilitator, not a teacher, just to make sure everyone talks and are respectful. And it was wonderful. Wonderful to do that. So you could do that on any topic, and it gets socialization, and they learn a lot, and they learn about diverse topics.
Can I unmute for a second and just follow up on that question, if that would be okay?
Sure, yes.
Because we've talked a little bit about, there's 2 families so far that are interested, and one concern that I've heard is that we were thinking of, I work part-time, so we were thinking of, the kids, let's say there's 4 families that do this, that they would shift between different homes. But we also heard that that could be challenging for the kids, and my daughter's going to turn 4 in August, so it could be challenging for them to be in those different environments and have maybe different expectations. And if we did that, we'd have to really try to keep like some sort of structure for timing and things like that. Do you have any thoughts about that part?
I think for young children of that age, they really like their parents there until they're more independent. I'm thinking like from 7 and up, they tend to be okay with unparented groups. But if a library is a possibility, that might be, a familiar place every week to go to, and maybe you could get a storage cupboard. But it's partnering with the library. But make it work. Try it, see if it works, and then make adjustments. Okay, another question. When we talk of children deciding, what does this mean for the younger years, say before the second surge around 13? What is a caregiver's role in supporting their decision making? Okay, so to me, unschooling means you empower children to decide from birth. So we're really good at letting toddlers pick what they want to play, but we're not good at letting 7-year-olds. So it is empowering them. If children decide they don't want to play a math game, let it go. You can offer things. If they say no, let it go. Maybe they might come to that in 3 years or so. But we empower children to decide what they want to learn from birth to the rest of their lives. So the caregiver's role in that is supporting their decision making. If you have a child who wants to learn welding, then obviously if they're 13, they can't drive to a makerspace. So you drive them, pay for it, those kinds of things. You drive and credit cards. But the rest is their decisions, and they decide when to start, when to quit. How does unschooling look like for the parents? How to facilitate natural common sense? And would you comment on the investment of time? It has to be a lot. Well, unschooling is 24/7. It occurs all the time. So it's not like you start at 9 a.m. and finish at 3. It's a lifestyle. So, but having said that, I do put parameters on it. If my child wants to plant an egg outside at 11 o'clock at night when I'm winding down for bed to see if an egg tree will grow, I'll say, can we negotiate this and do it tomorrow, right? So for unschooling, it is so relaxing. There's no deadlines, there's no assignments, there's no stress, there's no getting that child online at a particular time. And it is just so easy. It's like a summer day in July. I loved it, loved it. And there's no fighting with the children. So your relationship is one of natural respect and problem solving. Okay, high school dropout rate, 20 to 80%. Why is it a concern? There's no need that that should continue. Yes, I made that point because the school system doesn't seem to be concerned about that. They think, oh, our program's great. There's, if kids drop out of our program and our program is great, it's the kids' reason. There's something wrong with the kids we need to fix. They don't think, there's something wrong with our system we need to fix. Okay, a really good book that touches on that topic is A Self-Driven Child. How do you handle household chores and those kinds of things? That's a good question. We get a lot of that. And again, with unschooling, I talk about it in my book, but there's radical unschooling, and then there's also unschooling, educational unschooling. So radical unschooling is more parenting and education wrapped up in the same thing. And it works for a lot of families, but it's letting children own everything, not just their education, but their whole lifestyle. And then there's educational unschoolers, which I'm more of, in that I empower the kids to learn what they want, but in our house, we still have some structure that everybody agrees on. So in our house, everyone agrees on pitching in and doing chores without payment, and everybody gets money to spend. So I do believe in routines because the brain forges pathways in routines and things happening over and over again. So we had a family of 7 people. So we had a lot of chores and I wasn't doing them all. So the kids always have done chores. When they pushed back, we would negotiate. We always problem solved it and said, okay, what can you contribute? What can you help out with? What is something you want to do? And to this day, they do dishes now. I have adults, they do dishes, they do laundry, they help us paint, they help the neighbors, they volunteer, and it's not coerced or bribed. It is something they want to do because they want to do it. But that works for us. There's all different kinds of parenting and all different kinds of unschooling, and it works for each family. What about boundaries? If what they want to do is wrong ethically. All of us teach our children our morals and ethics. By about age 25, children get about 75% of our values. Actually, we had an instance where that happened. Oh, I gotta watch my time. Okay, I think I have to get out. But we work through it with the child. We say, if you want to do this, say smoke marijuana, here's a one-time consultation. Here's what I'm going to put forward as all my concerns. If you listen for this one time, you can make that decision. And we left the decision with the children. And so far, they've made pretty good choices, I think. Okay, last question. If a child doesn't have interest that provides intrinsic motivation to learn, how do you introduce ideas and encourage exploration and curiosity? Again, you model curiosity yourself. You cannot force that in another child or person. You can't even force. There are books there out there trying to get, your partner to lose weight or your child to stop smoking. That has to come from within, plain and simple. You can model it. You can confront with an I message and say you're concerned. You can problem solve the behavior. But in the end, the risk to your relationship goes up the more you push it. And my whole philosophy is to offer it. If they say no, accept that. And with that, people feel respected and they know what's best for their lives. Okay, I don't want to go over. I don't know if this room is needed for somebody else, but I just want to thank you all for coming today. And let's not be strangers. Let's keep in touch. I would love to hear your thoughts. I would be happy to answer your questions. You can find me through all these places. And thank you to everyone for coming to the AERO conference. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.